Good evening. Tonight we have a wonderful presentation prepared to you from our friends at Northwestern Medicine. But before we kick that off, I'd like to share a little bit about Promotable and what it is that we do. My name is Paul Wells and I'm head of marketing. Promotable is a workforce accelerator that closes employer skill gaps and prepares professionals for high growth careers in today's digital economy. At Promotable, we provide unmatched online learning experiences with world-class instructors, hands-on engaging live classes that emphasize collaboration, feedback, industry mentors, and a one-of-a-kind tailored experience that fits your career goals. We accomplish our learning goals through free events such as this, as well as short-form workshops and accelerated boot camp. Our soonest workshop will be taking place on October 6th as we explore data analytics with Excel. So if you're interested in that, I encourage you to visit promotable.io. Now, without any further ado, please allow me to welcome Northwestern Medicine's data analytics team, Paul Radzinski and Shuhan Zhou. Paul and Shuhan, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us and for the great introduction. I guess I'll kick us off. So before we start the presentation today, I'd like to ask our audience to take a few seconds and type down a few words in the comment section. It could be what kind of industry you're coming from, whether you're familiar with healthcare data, and your comfort level about data science. So this way we can get to know you a little bit and really tailor our presentation to your backgrounds. So here's our agenda for today. I'll get right into it. Many of you who are local to Illinois or Chicago have heard of Northwestern Medicine, but you may know or may not know we have a dedicated analytics team within the healthcare system. So we'll start from there. Here's everybody's picture on our immediate team. There are 8 of us, each coming from very diverse backgrounds and bring unique sets of skills to the table. And we'll get to our entire department in a little bit. So a little history about our department. We're quite young. The department started in 2012, back when it was only 10 founding team members to support 2 hospitals across the system. Northwestern Memorial, which many of you know, academic health center in downtown Chicago, and a community health center in Lake Forest suburbs. Over the years, our healthcare system really expanded quite a bit. We welcomed a number of new sites who joined through partnerships or acquisitions. 2018 was a milestone year for us. You can imagine with all the different groups joining, it's important we get everyone on the same page from the data perspective so that our data talk to each other. So in March 2018, we got everyone set up on the same electronic medical record. And then also within the same year, our department came up with this new innovative 3-pillar model to allow us to keep up with the growth of the rest of the system. Fast forward to today, we have more than 100 staff in the department. And then with the beginning of the new year upon us, our department leaders are thinking about new ways how we can become more aligned with our IT department so that we can have data architects working with product teams to really develop the cool architecture to power our analysis. So what is the 3-pillar model that Northwestern Analytics invented? So it is broken down by analytics consulting, product team, and the concierge team. Each focus on a different aspect of data and analysis, but we work collaboratively with each other. So I'll start with the bottom right. We have our young and energetic concierge team made up by both full-time staff members and student interns from across the city. So they act as a triaging desk for any new requests coming. Once an operation business leader or administrator submit a project request to us through our internal project management platform, Concierge is the front line reaching out to them to gather all the different aspects of the information and assess whether it's something that they can provide a quick turnaround or requires more development and more in-depth exploration. And the concierge team is also a great training ground for anyone who's interested in joining data and analytics as a career. With the outstanding talent pipeline they have built for us, our team is usually able to just hire talent folks right off the door to keep up with the growth of the department over the years. And then on the left, we have our product team. For a giant healthcare system like ours, it's not always so easy to figure what kind of projects get prioritized or what kind of teams have to dedicate resources to those projects. So product team serve as our spokesperson on system-wide collaboratives, where all kinds of different interests get expressed and people have conversations and decide on what initiatives get to work on in a democratic manner. And for those of you who have a little experience working with healthcare data, you know it is super messy and disorganized. So product team working with the architects try to make those data pools a little easier for us by developing all those data marts that we use internally, so that we can ensure we're getting data in an accurate and consistent manner, and all the different regions are coordinating on their efforts. And then finally, but not lastly, is our analytics consulting team. We work closely with operation leaders and improvement leaders from a hospital. So for us, we work closely with people at the Northwestern Memorial to usually provide the data support and generate any insights to help make a decision right away. And also by talking about data day in and day out and introducing new ideas that we hear in the industry overall, we also hope to cultivate a data-driven culture and help people think about questions a little bit differently. So today's presentation, since Paul and I are both from the analytics consulting team, will mostly speak to things from this single perspective. If you read the event description for today, you might notice the word analytics chasm got mentioned a few times. And you might be wondering what exactly is analytics chasm. So it is a concept first introduced in the 90s by a management consultant called Jeffrey Moore, I believe is his name. So the graph I have on here demonstrates a life cycle of any organization's data maturity process. On the very left, we have the more naive stage of data. This is when companies first start to realize it is important to store data and use data to make decisions. Maybe this is still when data lives in Excel spreadsheets and simple pie charts, bar charts get presented in meetings to help frame the conversation. And then on the very right of things is the most mature stage of data analytics at an organization, when data usually gets to unleash its power and teams can fully leverage on advanced machine learning models to try to predict the future and make decisions in a more proactive manner. In the middle is our chasm. Many organizations have problem crossing to the right side of the bridge or get stuck in the middle of the chasm for too long. And there are a variety of reasons for that. First, we do need a solid data foundation on the left to support any more advanced things to be happening on the right. Healthcare data is very disorganized, and it requires us to spend a lot of time on the left to clean the data and get to the right information. I'll give us an example. So imagine when you go to a clinic You might notice the doctors type a lot of notes in the computer while they're examining you or talking to you. And that is the kind of data we're working with. Free text data with all types of different typos or different shorthands that we need to parse through. And then secondly, if you work for an organization that can rely on self-service tools for any reporting needs, then the data analysts can usually free themselves to focus on building models and do all the cool and nerdy things on the right. But for a healthcare system like ours, it may or may not work for us just because the myriad of requests that come in is very complicated and we cannot always predict what is asked of us. For example, we can have an Excel live connection to the database with all the patient's information from the past year who has diabetes. But then if we want to add an actual layer who has had an insulin injection within a certain time frame and who's also at risk for COVID and has not paid their bill at Blue Cross Blue Shield, the requests get complicated very quickly and requires SQL or other programming language to figure out the logic and get to the right side of the information. And finally, crossing the chasm requires more than a little technical support. It is not something that just can be addressed by teaching everyone Python language or getting everyone the new software license to the coolest software ever. We do need to get our stakeholders on board and address their comfort level of using this cool and hard to explain technology sometimes. For us, the nurses and doctors, first and foremost responsibility is still to take care of the patients. So sometimes it gets a little difficult for them to balancing the needs of patients first, whereas also trying to understand the data and models we provide them. To sum up, analytics chasm is a gap in the journey of any organization's data maturity process, which takes more than a little effort to cross. So you might be wondering where we are, whereas Northwestern Medicine is nowadays. So we think we're right in the middle of the chasm. Maybe we have tiptoed to the other side once or twice successfully. We're like this guy walking on a tightrope, still trying to bridge the gap. Eventually, our vision is to be able to build a stable bridge in between the chasm so that we can cross from the left side to the right and jump back in comfortably. Very, very long term, our ultimate goal is to have something like this, where there is no chasm at all, and data is just at our disposal. So with that introduction, I'm going to pass it to Paul from Northwestern Medicine, who will share a few lessons our team have gathered through the process.
Thanks, Shuhan. So we've identified 6 areas where we've gotten to the chasm, and we'll talk a little bit about our experience there. In some instances, we've succeeded with crossing that chasm. In others, we're still more squarely on the left-hand side, but we're laying the groundwork to make it easier to get to the right-hand side of the chasm moving forward. I won't go over this slide in depth just yet, but we will continue to come back to this, and this will kind of, we'll touch on each of these topics and go into these in a little bit more detail. And one other thing I just want to point out is that you'll see a number of screenshots. Many of them or most of them have been modified to either remove obscure numbers, remove numbers, just because we didn't want to reveal any sensitive information or anything that we didn't want everyone to see. So just a heads up if you see some kind of funky things in the reports. So the first thing we'll touch on is operations funded positions on the consulting teams. So historically, the analytics department has been a centralized department where we field requests from divisions across the entire health system. So you might work on a request from the emergency department, then move to something working on obstetrics, then do something in an ambulatory setting. And really just, it was trying to find the balance between what was prioritized and what wasn't, is, a challenge that we've always faced as a department. So over the past year or so, there are a number of external departments that have reallocated funds that were previously used for analysts outside of analytics. And they moved these positions within the analytics department proper. And one of the biggest benefits with that, I think, has been removing intermediate deliverables. So we were seeing a lot of things like there would be a request that would come into the analytics department, and someone would say, we need whatever data it was. And we would serve it up, usually in a really basic report or something like a spreadsheet. And then somebody would take that and put it into Excel and build out additional reporting on top of it. So rather than building the right thing the first time, there was a lot of intermediate work that was happening. So here's an example of what something like that looks like. So this is more or less a spreadsheet of data looking at external transfers. So external transfers are when patients move from one hospital to another. There's a lot of reasons that it can happen. It could just be that the level of care offered by a smaller hospital isn't adequate for one of their patients, so they move them to another hospital. Or it could be something like a cardiac procedure is only done by one physician in the entire Midwest region, and so that patient would be transferred over to Northwestern to have a procedure like that done. So this is an old version of a report where you had to click about 6 times to actually get at any data, and there was no trending, nothing that could really be gleaned from the data other than this raw information without pulling it into Excel and doing that additional manipulation. Fast forward to what we have today, and this was built out by somebody that is funded by one of these external departments. This is using the same underlying data, but we've pulled it into Tableau and really built out a lot more robust, useful information for our operators. So you can see information like where the patients are coming from during COVID, whether or not the patient had COVID, looking at trends over time, being able to see things based on day of week. And there's really a much more robust set of information that we're able to supply. And we can still get at that underlying information. But this is a lot more stable, a lot more usable, a lot more repeatable, and easier to maintain than something like an Excel-based dashboard. So the next thing that we have is redefining who our customers are. So like I mentioned earlier, we've typically had a very broad set of stakeholders. And so if somebody from the emergency department was asking for something, well, we'd work on something for the emergency department. If there was something that was a nursing staffing challenge, we would work on a project for that. And so we had this kind of broad set of stakeholders without too many repeat customers. So what we've really tried to do over maybe the last year and a half is take a big chunk of our work and condense it down so that we're working with working on initiatives that support the long range goals for either the hospital or the health system. We take requests and projects that are endorsed by VPs and other executives. And then we've really done a lot more work with our quality departments and our process improvement departments. And I think by having a smaller set of folks that we're working with on a more regular basis, that has allowed us to really understand how many of our stakeholders tick, and they understand how we work and what we need from them to really create and partner for a really good deliverable. It's also given us opportunities to build trust and push the envelope a little bit more with our deliverables. So I think when we have that level of trust where we deliver something in a really good form, and we say, hey, let's try this additional thing, there's a little bit more room to allow us to come up short or have something that maybe doesn't work perfectly because they understand, we're trying something new and we really want to progress the how we're using data within our organization. I think it's also really helped with changing the perception of how the rest of the organization thinks about us, as how they think about analytics and what we do within the system. So I think we've really changed the perception of analytics being more data gatekeepers, where people say, I need to solve a problem. I need to go to analytics and say, I need 15 columns that give me this information. And we've been able to really showcase the unique skill set that we have within our department, using more advanced tools and really just a skill set that doesn't exist much outside of our department. The other thing is, I think that when you have customers that you don't work with on a regular basis, or you don't have an opportunity to showcase what you can do as a department, it makes it really easy for the customer to, or the stakeholders to come and ask for something specific. So if they don't know what we're capable of, they're not going to have the ability to ask for it. So I think that the more that we partner up with some more repeat customers, the more that those folks will hopefully come back and ask for more of the advanced things that we're showing them we're capable of. So there's an example here, and this is a scorecard. So this is a high-level overview of performance. In this example, it shows key metrics or KPIs for one of our emergency departments. And you have things like what the most recent performance was this past month, how you compare to the previous year. There's some target settings so you can see how you're doing compared to where you want to be. And it's really a passive look, and it doesn't really immediately highlight any trends or shifts in metrics. So fast forward to something that was built out earlier this year, shortly before COVID hit, using the same base architecture and the same set of data. We kind of have this proof of concept that takes all the scorecard metrics and analyzes them using a control chart and some control chart methodology. So up at the top, you can see a number of different controls that an end user has to say, I want to look at something that exceeds the 2 standard deviation rule, or something that has an out of control trend moving in the upward direction. And really what we want to do is start to move to this world where people aren't necessarily seeking out numbers themselves, but we're pushing numbers to people. And so this is still very much in its infancy, but I think what we're looking to do is move to more technologies like this, where we're starting to drive the discussion, or we're bringing the things that are potential projects to work on to our stakeholders, rather than sitting back passively and having them come to us and request specific things. So I think we've had some decent success with that. And this is another example where maybe a year and a half ago, we were asked about how we could improve our likelihood to recommend within one of our emergency departments. And likelihood to recommend is a questionnaire that goes out to patients that really get touched in any way within our system. And one of the questions is essentially, would you recommend us or this facility to your friends and family? And you get basically a 5-point response, and you're shooting for people to say, yes, we would absolutely recommend this to our friends and family. So this is a very broad request that kind of said, what can we do to improve this? And so this was a pretty interesting project where it probably unfolded over the course of about 4 months and took a number of different forks. And one of the cuts that we did was really taking data that was pretty low-hanging fruit, something like zip codes, and we plotted where our patients live that were coming to this emergency department. And I think that this was, and then we also did some calculations to just do something like distance and say, what is the distance that patients are traveling to get to us? And so this isn't the most informative slide, just because we didn't want to have any kind of trade secrets that we were revealing. But one of the things that came out of this was we looked at patients segmented by folks that lived within 5 miles of our hospital, 5 to 10 miles, and then greater than 10 miles. And we had some really interesting trends, and we tried to normalize everything by weekends and work hours and evening hours, just to make sure that we were really getting a good understanding of who these patients were, why they were coming to us. But one of the things that came out is there were some pockets of patients that I think if we were looking at this just in a spreadsheet of data, or you did something simple like said, let's look at a count of the zip codes where our patients are coming from, you wouldn't see a lot of the clustering that happened with this. So this project started out with us exploring who was coming to our emergency department and understanding their likelihood to recommend scores and how we might be able to make that better. And it really turned into something that drove a new way that we were looking at data within our organization. And a number of times people have come back and asked for similar cuts of data to understand from a visual way where our patients are coming from. So the findings that we had for this were leveraged by our real estate and strategy teams to hone in on expanding our ambulatory clinics and things like our immediate care facilities, so like an alternative to an emergency room. So a lot of that work was already happening in tandem of this project, but I think that they benefited a lot from just seeing the analysis that we had and some of these pockets of patients that really were revealed from this work. So Shuhan touched a bit about how our department is laid out, and I think that that is another thing that has really been helpful for us to build a strong foundation to be able to start to move to that right-hand side of the chasm. So just to reiterate, we have the concierge, we have the product teams, and then we have the consulting teams. And I think that we all sort of lean on one another and support one another to really build a good data-driven organization and facilitate feedback on something like a data mart. So in a data mart example, we have that concierge team that's doing a lot of the triaging. They're taking on some requests that are a little bit easier to fulfill. And so I think when there's strong, robust, trustworthy data marts that they have to answer, they can answer more of those questions with a shorter turnaround time and take work off the consulting team's plate or the product team's plate. Throughout the entire department, when we have these data marts in place, it allows us to more accurately and consistently supply data and have really a single source of truth, where we're not spending a lot of time going back and saying, well, why do these two reports or why do these two data sources not match in the information? Because we know that they're coming from the same data source. So it makes it a lot easier to suss out information like that. And here's an example of a data mart that we have looking at surgical data. So block utilization is essentially different surgical specialties get allotted specific times that they are able to schedule operating rooms and do surgeries. And so you obviously want to maximize the amount of time that you're utilizing a scarce resource like an operating room. And so just like we saw before, this was kind of a basic extract. This wasn't coming from a data mart. And if we fast forward to what we have today, we built out our data marts a little bit more to really focus on being able to leverage this data in a little bit different way. And now we have a way to visualize our block times, both for past days and understand what how our performance looked in the past, but also look at it in the future. So this allows our surgical operators to really hone in on where we can be doing things differently. So, for example, we see this orange area kind of in the middle that looks like it's filling about the whole time. That's something that we want to see. Over on the left-hand side where we've got the red, is there a reason why we're not fulfilling that? Can we be reallocating that time so that orange is less constrained by the single OR that they have? I think this has allowed us to really drive a lot more value and to showcase things in a way that makes a lot more sense. And again, I think I would just want to get back to reiterating, getting away from just pure data dumps and spreadsheets of data to these more visual tools, built in things like Tableau, where the end user has a lot more control over picking what they want to look at, changing date ranges, and really having a lot more control over the end data that they are seeing. So COVID has undoubtedly changed the entire world and kind of probably upended people's workflows and how everyone goes about work for everyone on this call. Especially in the healthcare world, we were heavily impacted by COVID. So back in March and April, we were building out workflows, or workflows were being built out in our electronic medical record, which houses all of our patient information that had never existed before. COVID wasn't a thing, in the States before March. And so it was a really chaotic time where we would set out in the morning and say, here are the things that we want to accomplish. And by the end of the day, and by noon, we would know that the things that we were finishing up that day were going to already have to be reworked the next morning. So there was confusion, seemed like we never had enough time. It was really stressful, and thankfully we're past the worst of that. But one thing that it really allowed us as a system to do, and I think analytics had always been really pushing for this, but it was really separating needs from wants. And I think that we didn't have enough time, we didn't have enough resources, things were just changing too quickly where we really couldn't focus on anything other than the absolute needs and building out a lot of the data sets that we were creating. And so I think that as we've transitioned out of COVID, it has really changed how people think about the approach that we take and has given us a lot more ability to sort of give those proof of concept examples to say, here are success stories that we've had when we take a more iterative approach. So here's an example of some data that we were consuming and still are consuming during COVID. So this is pulling in data from an external source. So this is IDPH, or the Illinois Department of Public Health. And this is focusing on different regions that align with the governor's reactivation plan. And so these are sites, each one that we have highlighted on here are different sites that we have within or where we have hospitals. And so what we're trying to look at are different things like what the positivity rate of tests are, how many cases there are, what age breakdowns are. And this is just one screenshot from much more robust report. But the reason that we're looking at a lot of this information is we want to understand as quickly as possible if there's an area that's becoming a hotspot or there's an outbreak that's happening, because based on the reactivation plan, if there are certain thresholds that are eclipsed, we could be forced to have a certain number of inpatient beds available, or we might have to reduce the number of surgeries or the type of surgeries that we're able to do. And so getting ahead of that as much as possible can really help us out, or really even be able to see if we're going to see an influx of patients, or we expect an influx of patients in an upcoming week based on some of the trends that we're seeing and where patients are coming from. So that's an example of some of the COVID data that we have produced. So reactivation coming out of the worst of COVID. So let's hope that the worst of COVID is behind us, especially as we head into the fall and the flu season. But as a health system, we've at least settled into kind of a new normal. And a lot of the work that we've done over the last 2 to 3 months has been reactivation. And so as we've had things like our surgeries coming back online, or our inpatient beds filling back with the patients that we would normally see, rather than trying to keep them open as much as possible for these COVID patients, we've had to it's been a good opportunity for us to reassess our deliverables and our workflows, and really take some of the Excel-based work that was happening out there and transition it into something that lives within our EDW. So this screenshot is a dashboard that analytics got involved with a few months back. So this is showing inpatient volumes over on the left-hand side. And then on the right is just a forecast of expected volumes, and that's being used to drive some staffing decisions. So this data had been consumed for probably a couple of years before we got involved with it, or before COVID hit, but it was manually compiled outside of the analytics department, stored in Excel, and the forecasting was just a simplistic equation. So analytics really came in, worked on this project, and sort of separated some of the real-time needs that we're still getting from our electronic medical record. And so for something like forecasting, or for something like looking at the historical trends, let's really go to and work and leverage using our EDW, which is a much better and robust place for us to store this data. Shuhan touched on this, but one of the challenges with moving to the right-hand side of that chasm is getting stakeholders comfortable with different components that can be a little bit more black box, like a machine learning model, or just a predictive model in general. And so one of the things that we did with this is started to do a more sophisticated predictive model. And you probably can't see it too easily on there, but there's a filter on the right-hand side that allows for the end user to shift between their old model that was really simplistic and a new predictive model that analytics is producing. We also went through an iterative approach so that we could refine the prediction over time and get people comfortable with a more straightforward version of that, and then continue to iterate on top of it. So I think getting our end users really comfortable with that black box and something that they don't necessarily have as much control over is something that we're trying to do more of. And I think that this report is a good example of it, where if they ever do feel uncomfortable, or a prediction that's coming out looks a little different than they would expect, they have the ability to fall back on something that they know. We obviously don't want to be using that all the time. We don't want people, we want to continue to move into these more sophisticated modeling. But at least for a transitional period, I think that this is a good happy medium that we've been able to deliver. And then team motivation and empowerment is one other thing that within the central analytics consulting team, which is what Shuhan and I are a part of, I think we've really tried to make it so that people have an ability to try new things, try new tools, try new approaches, and sort of have a safe space to do that. So one of the things that we started, I don't know, maybe we've probably done about 6 of them now, and each one takes about 3 weeks. So we've been doing it for maybe 3 or 4 months now, is something that we're just calling hackathons. And it is work that's driven by no one specifically asking for something, but we really try and root it in real world asks, something that we would maybe say no to in the past, or trying to utilize a new tool, a new technique for doing something, or taking something that we use every day like Tableau and really just trying to push it to the limits in a way that we haven't before. The work is we try and have it driven by the team so that there's the engagement in it and an ownership piece of it. And I think it gives us a good opportunity to sort of fail in a safe space. So we can try something new. There's not really an expectation for what the deliverable is, but we can sort of push the boundaries of what we do as a department, which I think has been really helpful. So the thing that's up there right now is something that we built and one other thing is we try and split up into kind of 3 smaller teams so that we have 3 groups of people kind of approaching the same problem. And how everyone does it can be a lot different. The tools, the technologies, the actual deliverables could be very different, but it's a good way for us to learn from one another. So the thing that's up on the screen right now is a Python-based solution to quickly upload manual data into our EDW. So like we looked at before, we had a dashboard that previously was all Excel-based. And I think what we're finding is we're moving a lot of things from Excel into our EDW. And even if it's just for a short term, as we're building out more robust queries, we're getting a data mart or something like that set up, this gives us the ability to quickly and flexibly load manual data into the EDW and have it as something that isn't on the shoulders of the analytics team, but really can be something that our stakeholders are using on a regular basis. And maybe they have a need for real-time data, but now they're able to go in 2 or 3 times a day, push that data into the EDW, and immediately see it on a dashboard that's hosted on our servers as opposed to something that's compiled within Excel. This is another example. It's not anything that's overly sophisticated, and it's not moving. So yeah, actually, I think if you, yeah, it doesn't look like either of these are moving, but this was something that we built in D3, which is a visualization program using JavaScript, I believe. And so what this was a race showing different zip codes and where there were flare-ups or positive tests coming back during COVID. And so you could probably accomplish something like this in Tableau, or you could do something just with a static line chart over time. But I think when you start to get really large sets of information where you've got 100 different zip codes, a visualization like this might be a really good way to see where an outbreak is sort of occurring. And even if we don't ever use this for something, it gave us the ability to get a little bit more familiar with using something like D3 and just gives us more familiarity. So maybe we do want to use that for some future work that we do, and now we have some comfort and familiarity with that. And then this is another one where you can't see the movement on it, but what this is a way to look at how patients are moving throughout our hospital. And we have this plotted against that likelihood to recommend score. And so this is another one where just seeing something visually, I could see a use case for something like this to say, where are delays happening in an ambulatory clinic visit? And so you could physically go in and watch patients move throughout their visits and see, oh, this is the place where everyone's sort of getting hung up. And so this was something that was built in Tableau actually a while back, and the person that built it out took some new, we upgraded to the newest version of Tableau a couple months ago, and he was able to leverage some of the new visualizations that we had to really make this a much more robust and usable tool than we could in the past. So that's a little bit about some of the hackathons and that we're doing as a team. So where are we and what's next? So I think that we are finding our way to the chasm. We found our way to the chasm quite a few times. I think that we are setting ourselves up through the way that our department's structured and trying to do things like have data marts that are really built, starting to build data marts that are built with feature engineering in place so that we can more easily do things like machine learning or pull together predictive models instead of having that be a really big hurdle that we need to do with any new project. And so I think we're at the chasm. Some of the things that I think we can focus on, we have focused on, is continuing to address stakeholder comfort and data literacy. So we talked about something like that reactivation model, where we took a simplistic Excel-based report and a simple model and built that out into a more robust tool and gave our end user the ability to sort of switch back and forth between the old and the new. Another example of that would be that scorecard and having that more static information, and us moving to something like what we call the performance narrative, which had that control chart, and being able to really dive into the data in a different way. Finding the balance between the old and the new. I think one of the things is that I've realized is you can never really fully live on the right hand side of that chasm. You constantly have to be moving back and forth, and without a really strong set of data foundation, you're not going to ever get successfully to the right hand side of that chasm. Finding the old or finding the balance between the old and the new. I think the other thing that we're trying to do is really have this kind of chicken and egg game. Is if people don't know what you can produce, they're not going to come and ask you for it. So what we're really trying to do is do little things at the end of a project, or work with stakeholders on a more regular basis so that they're familiar and comfortable with what we do, and we can try something that goes a little bit above and beyond what somebody knows to ask for. And the more that they see examples of that, the more that they can come back and ask us specifically for that type of work, or engage us in problem solving instead of just looking for a set of data. Like I said, maintaining strong data foundations is extremely important. I think the way that we're set up within the analytics department is extremely helpful. But without that strong data, there's really no way that you're going to be able to move on to that right-hand side of the data chasm. Iterating to success is, I think, extremely important. There's things like the agile methodology, and I think that the more that we get our customers familiar with that and comfortable with that, the better off we are. Oftentimes people come to us asking for a car. We say, let's just deliver you a wheel. We expand that into a skateboard, and then we slap a handle on it. We go, great, you've got a scooter, and we didn't have to go through all this stuff like building a roof and a trunk and doors. And oftentimes people find that to be the most rewarding thing. And so I think that's been also really helpful for us. And then the other one is just, I think, embracing failures. I think people shy away from failures, but the kind of way I think about it is I would rather see everyone have 2 or 3 kind of small to medium failures a week and learn something new, or discover how to maybe try something differently or do something differently the next time. And I think a good example of that is just the hackathon that we have is a safe space to sort of try new things. And the more that we have those regular stakeholders, the more that we have that ability to try something a little bit above and beyond. They know that they're going to get a solid base product. And so if we do try something at the end, it's a lot more, that safe space to sort of fail and have somebody know that, they still have something robust, they can trust the data, et cetera. So that is our presentation. And so now we'll move into the discussion. A couple things that, I think we were interested in just hearing from you is what successes you've had as an organization. I haven't really looks like there are some comments that have come in, and I think Paul will be doing a little bit of the emceeing right now. But if you do have questions, I think some of the things is where have you had success overcoming that data chasm? What are some things that we are doing well? What are things that we're overlooking? And just what questions do you have about the work we've done, or how our department is structured, things like that. Thank you.
Paul and Simon, thank you so much for that excellent presentation. We do have a couple of questions that came through. But first, I would like to hit off on something that you ended with, and that is embracing failure, which I think is something that, in our professional lives, we're not always, opt to do. You gave an example of course, your hackathon is a safe space to test out certain procedures, but can you speak to anything, real life scenarios where things didn't go as planned and how you were reactive to that?
I think COVID was a place where there was a lot of frustration, failures, reworks. And I think that was one of those things where we really had to rely on one another and really trust that everyone was doing their best, putting forth their best effort. And I think that was something that really got illuminated for me. It was just, it really, even outside of our department, was seeing when there were breakdowns in communication, when there were just something that we would deliver and somebody would say, that's not what I need. And it was just like, okay, well, let's kind of, rather than getting upset about this or continuing to get frustrated about it, really just sitting down and saying, oh, I'm sorry, how can I do this differently? I can point directly to someone that we were working with a lot during COVID, and it got to the point where we just sort of said, hey, let's just take 30 minutes and sit down and have a conversation about things that have, we each could provide some feedback for one another that we could do differently. And I think it was just one of those things where it was great to just sort of vent to one another, and also have that really just candid feedback for one another to say, here's something that you do extremely well. Please keep doing that. And here's an area where I think, we could have known about this a week before, or keeping us more in the loop on this, and giving us more of that big picture feel would have helped us address something earlier on. And so I think that road really works both ways. But I think having those conversations, not shying away from them, I think can be a really good way to go about that.
Excellent. COVID-19 aside, what other kind of big challenges are you facing as an organization, as a team?
I think one of the things that and actually I'll pause. Shuhan, do you have any examples? I've got one or two that I can share.
Sure. Yeah. I think one big challenge for healthcare industry overall is interoperability. So I see there's a question in the comments asking what portion of the data we're using is generated internally versus coming from external source. Based on my experience, I think the bulk of the data we're using is still internal generated, and by working with all the different stakeholders over the years, I think people do have that demand and interest wanting to connect the dots across institutions, even see the patient's movement across states, across different regions. So I think interoperability and making very sensitive, personalized level data speak to each other is very important. And certainly there are technology on the horizon trying to address this issue. But for us to really onboard and utilize that technology in a secure way, that's making the most sense. It certainly deserves a little more thoughts from everybody.
Excellent. Paul, anything to add on that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll use just maybe a different example, and maybe this goes to how Northwestern Medicine is set up. So we're an integrated academic medical center, which essentially means that each hospital that we bring into the fold, we work to get as quickly as possible up onto the same electronic medical record. And a lot of times you'll see these massive systems, and they're really a system by name only. So they might have 10 hospitals, but essentially you might have 3 or 4 different electronic medical records throughout those. And so you have analytics departments that really aren't a centralized resource. And so Northwestern really strives to provide the same level of care regardless of where you go within our system. And I think what we really are trying to do within the analytics department is build things one time that will work everywhere. And so there's a lot of challenges with that, because you end up with a lot of different people from a lot of different places that have a lot of different priorities. And so one of the, I think, really great things with the way that we're structured, but this becomes a challenge, is the consulting team is really working on initiatives that are more locally based. So we might take something like the surgical block times, and we might build that out in the central region. And so that can become something that maybe doesn't really work for those other regions right out of the box. But what it allows us to do is we can give that to like the product team, and they can take that as a proof of concept to go say, hey, we found some really great success with this. How can we roll this out more broadly? And I think that what we've really found is that we've got a decent structure in place, but there's almost more gray with which type of projects go to like the consulting team versus the product team. And so I think that that's a challenge that we run into quite a bit, is how to find that balance between building something quickly and locally versus where's the pivot point to build something out so that it works for the entire system, which we're really trying to do with the bulk of the work that we do.
Excellent. Thank you so much. One individual, Alessandro, wants to know, with there being a lot of unstructured COVID-19 data and how it's being generated and exchanged across organizations these days, how do you handle and tackle that data harmonization? Such as, free text, clinical data, or EHR data. So again, I think that goes back to, Stephen had previously asked, we talk about managing data quality.
I think one of the things is we do most of the data that we're consuming is something that comes out of a more structured data format. So while we have the ability to get into notes and things like that, the bulk of the work that we're doing, I think, is coming from more of those structured data sets. And so I think that's one of the big challenges that we run into is a lot of things that we look at are, you really need somebody with that clinical sense to go through and review the last month of a patient's data record and read through those notes. And so I think what we've really done a lot of is try to identify those places where the unstructured data is unusable and really work to put workflows into place where we're getting that important information in a more structured format. We've also, and I think that our alignment with the IT department is also another thing that I think is going to go a long way to really help with that. So we are consuming data coming out of our source systems, but we're not actually making the changes or building things out within Epic, which is our primary place where the patient data is stored. And so a lot of the way that things were set up, it's like somebody has the ability to do a little bit more formatted note writing. So it's like it's sort of a combination between free text and structured data. But a lot of times the way that it's set up, that the structured data wasn't actually being pushed out anywhere. And so I think that the more that we align with them and the more that with the actual IT department and get involved with the builds up front and say, well, what is the reporting that someone's going to want out of this, so that we have the ability to sort of weigh in on that. I think that that's something that we've done a bit of, but I think the more that we get integrated with the IT department, the better off we're going to be. So I don't know if I quite answered that question.
No, I think that was excellent. I'm going to actually give you a two-part question, Shuhan and Paul, and we'll get ready to wrap things up. But what challenges do you have in healthcare that you might not have in a less regulated industry? And do you share any of your data across any health information exchanges?
Shuhan, would you like to start?
Sure. I can think of 2 comments on top of my head right now. So we do, but we currently do not share any patient level information. So it's more like process things that we share with insurance companies or a regulatory body that does rating for all the hospitals. So nothing that's coming right out of the EMR. There's always a mid-step that we add on to before sharing the data externally. Regarding the healthcare data industry and challenges that we face in particular, I think this touches on the left side of the chasm. So 2 industries in the US that's highly regulated, the financial industry and us, which means there are a lot of regulatory bodies looking over our shoulder and asking for periodical reports constantly, which is a good thing for us to get the data standardized, but at the same time takes our attention a little bit away from building the more advanced modeling on the left side, on the right side of the chasm. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, and I think I'll just add to that too. There are some places where there's a system called Vizient, which used to be called UHC or University Health Consortium, if you're familiar with either of those terms, and that's something that is kind of a clearinghouse of medical or healthcare information. And so we use that for benchmarking our hospitals versus peer hospitals, and you can get at some level of detail, usually not the patient level data, but you could get down and say, how many patients had COVID at one of these sites? What was, and you can get at to some level of granularity where you can say, let's look at the race of patients that had a COVID mortality. And so I think that that's something that's been like a really hot topic. And so we have done analysis like that to really understand how we're doing compared to some of our peer hospitals when it comes to treating minority populations and things like that during COVID. And so we can leverage that, but we generally don't have, as Shuhan said, very granular data or patient level data that we can do a one-to-one comparison on a patient by patient level.
That's excellent. Well, I'm going to close us off with this final question that we'd like to end things with. And Shuhan, Paul, what advice would you have for an individual that would like to break into data? into this exciting new field, especially as the digital economy becomes more and more competitive. What words of wisdom can you leave them with today?
I would say go out and play with data. And as kind of dumb as that sounds, I think that it's find an interest that you have and go try and do something with it, build something with it. I'm a really big Dave Matthews Band fan, and there is an incredible website that has just every concert they've ever played and song that they've played and stuff like that. And I was talking to somebody at work, and he's done a lot of work extracting data from websites. And so there's like kind of a utility that you can plug into Python to use that and pull down information. And so there was no way to get at this kind of underlying concert information. And I just kind of said, all right, I'm going to go play with this and figure out how to make this work. And I ended up having a ton of fun with it, just sort of was able to pull down this data, really understand a lot more about Python than I ever understood. Got that pulled into like a database on my computer, was able to go through and really understand things like the ETL process and the data cleaning, and really pulling down this set of pretty good data, and then finding that I could make it a lot more robust than I thought I could right out of the gates. Then I was able to take that and do some visualizations on it. And so I think when you find something that sort of is a good data source or something that you're interested in exploring, it's just go out there and have a good time with it. Start small, try something, and again, be okay with sort of falling short of your goals. And just, I think, learning a new technology, getting into SQL, learning something like R or Python, doing machine learning, all of those things, you can read about it till you're not blue in the face. You're talking till you're blue in the face, but you know what I mean. You can read about it and read about it and read about it, but just going out and doing it, I think, is the best approach that you can take to really get familiar and understand something.
An excellent response. Shuhan, I'm going to default to you. Any words of wisdom or advice?
That's really wonderful. I think Paul touches on stepping outside of your own comfort zone from the data perspective. I'll build on top of that by saying you should also carry whoever is using your data out of that person's comfort zone as well. So I'm a huge believer that data itself doesn't mean anything as long as it doesn't get interpreted correctly or generate insights that can turn into a real world solution. So sometimes it needs a little bit of a uncomfortable discussion that could be happening between you and the person who's using the end solution you're generating. And sometimes, not always, that conversation is comfortable and people may feel offended, but you do still have to keep having those conversations and carry the team forward.
Shuhan Joe, Paul Rudzinski with Northwestern Medicine, thank you so much. And everyone, thank you for tuning in. We're now at the top of the hour. So with that, have a wonderful evening, and be sure to visit us online at promotable.io. Thank you, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.